Hello, I'm Rabbi Michael Howald.
Hi, I'm the Reverend Emily DeTar Birt.
And I'm Cantor Lauren Bandman.
Tonight we're going to have a discussion about the intersection of politics and faith. And I'm very grateful that my colleague Cantor Lauren Bandman has agreed to be our moderator tonight. Cantor?
Reverend Emily DeTar Birt has served the Unitarian Church of Staten Island as a consulting minister since 2017. She is also the community coordinator for Not So Churchy under Reverend Mika Vandersall. Reverend DeTar Birt graduated from Union Theological Seminary in 2015. Rabbi Michael Howald has served Temple Israel as its rabbi for more than 10 years. Rabbi Howald is also the co-chair with Reverend Karen Jackson of Staten Island Religious Leadership. Rabbi Howald was ordained by Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and holds law and undergraduate degrees from Stanford University. So, as we begin this conversation tonight, I will be posing questions to each of our clergy members, and each of them will have a chance to answer the questions. We'll kind of alternate who gets to go first, and you can feel free also to sort of chime in and join in with each other. But this is really in a conversational style. So, if you're ready to begin, I will pose our first question. Wonderful. All right. So, Reverend DeTar Birt, can we start with you? And the question for both of you, but if you'll answer first, do you feel that your clergy training prepared you for dealing with questions of faith and politics?
I would say yes and no. I was never imagining a United States that got to the kind of political division that we've seen in the last 5 or so years. I will say this, that my seminary, Union Theological Seminary, did prepare me for social justice activism, which involved negotiating the boundaries of politics and faith, specifically the Johnson Amendment. So I did learn about, don't endorse political candidates from the pulpit. As a public figure and as a clergy person, don't endorse a particular political party or side, and that there's a difference between that and endorsing social justice efforts or policies that match up with my faith values. So I did learn that in seminary. However, I don't think anyone could have ever been prepared for the kind of political divisiveness that has happened in the last 5 years. And I certainly was not prepared in my seminary training for how to talk about anything from the anti-trans bathroom bills to Trump as president to so many other things that have happened in the last 5 years. Yeah, nothing prepared me for that.
And how about you, Rabbi Howald?
Yeah, it's remarkable when I think about it, but for 5 years, there was very little discussion about politics. On occasion, as an aside, a professor would say something while we were discussing some other subject about some, lesson that he or she had learned in their congregations. But we, by and large, did not have that many teachers who had actually been in the pulpit. We had a lot of academic teachers who couldn't bring like some hard-won experience about how to deal with politics. And I only remember a couple of discussions over 5 years. And I think the only person who really discussed it seriously over like more than one, limited time in one class period was Rabbi Larry Hoffman. We actually read some books that I never would have read, like by Richard Rorty and some other philosophers who dealt with sort of political issues. And we talked about them, but we never really talked about how that works in a congregation. I don't remember any discussion, for instance, about the Johnson Amendment or what you could or couldn't do. We did talk a lot about social justice because the reform movement prides itself on being a movement of social justice. But I particularly remember Lenny Kravitz, not that Lenny Kravitz, the one, from HEC. And I remember him saying over and over and over again in class that when we're ordained, we're not experts in politics, that we're experts in Torah. and that all of our conversations from the pulpit had to be couched in those terms. It had to be couched in Torah. And 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 but nobody said, well, how do you talk about the social justice efforts that our movement is part of, without being political? You had to sort of learn that on your own.
Yeah, it sounds like both of you had a similar experience where you sort of had this theoretical training, but not so much, and maybe a little bit about the rules, but not terribly much about that. But that a lot of it was really on the job training, and a solid foundation in the values that our traditions bring.
I will say one last thing about seminary.
Sure.
I'm grateful for Union Theological Seminary because I learned from a diverse set of perspectives, including I'm very honored to have learned from Dr. James Cone, who is the head of the founder of Black Liberation Theology. And because that was at my seminary, there was this real understanding that the extension of faith is social justice and what we do in the public square. Like this way of understanding faith as being tied to how we advocate for people, how we advocate for each other. And there was a lot of political conversations at Union, but again, there wasn't a lot of training about, well, how do you do that while also being like a clergy leader in a congregation or in that setting? And that had to be taught through experience, through help from denominational leaders, through trial and error. Yeah.
Sure. And just for the folks who are watching and listening, would either of you like to talk a little bit about the Johnson Amendment to let them know what that is that you both had referred to?
Oh, Reverend, maybe since you actually had it at seminary, you can.
I mean, again, it's not perfect. I actually don't even know where the origins of the Johnson Amendment are. Like, where would I find it as an amendment in a book somewhere? But all I know is the Johnson Amendment has been the term used over and over again for what's called the separation of church and state. And that gets really complicated and loaded, but this year, with the help of actually my denomination around conversations about faith and politics, what I was taught that to mean is that as a clergy or faith leader, you don't have the right to endorse a political party or a political candidate. Because you're seen as a moral leader, it can be dangerous to endorse particular people. It can seem as almost insidious and wrongly influential. And what I'm grateful for is there is this fine line and this difference between having your faith stand up as a moral voice for social justice policies, for concerns in the ways that it treats people. So I can talk about political policies often I didn't know this until later. I can talk about that from my pulpit because it is a matter of faith when it comes to how we treat other people, compassion, where our faith values lead us to see different policies and how people are being treated. But that is different and separate from endorsing either a political party or endorsing a candidate.
Absolutely. Rabbi Howald, did you want to say something else?
I just want to add too, that because I compare this to my law school education. In law school, you think it's a bunch of lawyers. There was no discussion about politics or leadership at all. As a matter of fact, one of our teachers who, sadly just died, Deborah Rohde, she actually instituted an innovation at the law school after we left, where she said it's time to start teaching, law students about politics and leadership. And if it wasn't taught in law schools, right? When you think of all the lawyers who go into politics, I guess it's unremarkable that it's not taught, that, places where we, ordain our religious leaders. But I think it should be. So.
Well, and in addition to what you were saying about the sort of the role of leadership and being careful about the power behind that, the potential power behind that role and the influence, and standing up for values, yes, but not for a particular candidate. In addition to that, it can also jeopardize the nonprofit status of a church or a synagogue or religious organization if a particular political candidate is backed. So it's sort of both the theoretical and the very practical and logistical concern.
Though I will just add that I've always understood that to mean endorsement has like the leader of my congregation. that I'm free to do what I would like as a private person, but
Yes.
I have to be clear in the, the different hat, I guess, I'm wearing, right? So
Yeah. Sure.
Absolutely. Like I've seen clergy leaders during this past election cycle when they've posted about a candidate saying, I am posting as a private citizen, not as a minister, just to make sure people know like that boundary and that line.
Yeah, absolutely. So because you both wear those different hats depending on where you are in your life. I'm wondering if either of you think this is sort of a big question for a simple yes or no. Um, but do you believe that politics has a place in faith or faith in politics, or should they remain separate? And Rabbi Howald, I'll start with you this time.
I don't think they can be separate. I really don't think that they can. And if we think about like the values that are part of our faith, if the values that are part of our faith, like the equal dignity of all human beings, as an example, if that doesn't motivate us to be involved in certain initiatives for social justice, then what good is our faith? I was before the one thing that I read this years ago, actually, before I applied to rabbinical school, but it's a line from Abraham Joshua Heschel in his book. And he said, religion as an establishment must remain separate from the government. Yet prayer as a voice of mercy, as a cry for justice, as a plea for gentleness must not be kept apart. Let the spirit of prayer dominate the world. Let the spirit of prayer interfere in the affairs of man. Prayer is private, a service of the heart, but let concern and compassion born out of prayer dominate public life. And I remember reading that and thinking, that's what I believe, right? That concern, like if our prayers mean anything, right? We pray for peace, but we can't do anything to bring about peace, I don't know. To me, it's like they fit hand in glove within, the limits that we previously talked about. So
I completely agree. And I think about the legacy, at least specifically in the United States, when I think about the American context, right? I look back and faith and politics have this very interwoven history. Both when it comes to across the spectrum, right? Conservative voices using faith when it comes to various bills, as well as religious, as I'm more on the political liberalish side, using religious voices. And I think about the legacy of changes we've been able to have in the United States. It wouldn't be made politically without faith. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., a pastor, a preacher who lived out his faith by acting out on the political stage. So I love that you quoted Abraham Joshua Heschel, and I'm going to remember that quote, that there's a difference between the government and a government's use of institutionalizing faith as a means of, I don't know, power, control, institutionalizing a particular religion over others. It is important that we have freedom of faith and freedom of belief. Otherwise, I don't know if Unitarian Universalists would be so many in the United States if it weren't for that. That's different than the ways faith can be a voice in politics, just as was said in prayer. So I love that distinction, and I'm going to keep that in my heart.
So Rabbi Howard, are you going to say something else?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to ask, so if we agree that there is an intersection, an appropriate intersection between faith and politics, what are some constructive ways for communities to get involved or to discuss politics?
Well, some of the things that we've done as a congregation in the past, we've registered voters. We tried to encourage political participation. And get information to voters, like we used to hold candidate forums here at Temple Israel, where you invite, the candidates for a particular position after either, during the primary season or during the general election, and they would come and speak to their position on issues. But I also think there's room for, being involved in events of in our own communities. I know that a number of our congregants did participate in some of the marches after the death of George Floyd. I myself participated in one. I thought it was a very powerful experience to participate in those. And, I felt my role there was, really just to be among, people who believe that um, there should be accountability and that, we live in a society where we have a lot of work to do to perfect our our uh, our law enforcement and our justice system and I to me it's something that I think people should have a right to be involved with it, even people of faith, especially people of faith. So
Mm. Reverend DeTar?
Absolutely. I love the registering people to vote or getting out the vote. There was an entire, I'm sure this happened not only, I've seen the work that Temple Israel has done, and thank you for that work. I'm sure also your own denomination probably asked you too, and so did mine. My denomination asked you the vote or getting out the vote this past year. And what's great about that is, again, it's not endorsing a political party. It's just asking people to make sure their voices are heard and empowering the democratic process. I think that's something that many faiths, if not all faiths, can really be a part of, is understanding the value of everyone raising their voice. Finally, I think it's important for people to discern where their faith values are and how they show up in politics when it comes to who they vote for or how they vote for policies or what's happening in their city, their county, their nation, both on the local or national level. That your faith is unique. Your own values are important and they should be spoken for. I especially think this is important when you notice political candidates using faith to propone particular ideas that may not match up with yours. I'll say this personally and use I statements. So I notice that often faith values are brought up when it comes to not condoning, dismissing or trying to devalue LGBTQIA plus voices in politics, whether it comes from trans bathroom bills to those who are trans or non-binary not being in the military. And my faith really values people of all gender expressions, that they are important, that they have dignity, and I want them to have a full life. And so I find it important to have another faith voice that gets raised, saying no, there are people of faith who both condone same-sex marriage but who rejoice in the identities of these people, and it's important to have that faith voice lifted, especially because in the United States faith gets portrayed as a particular voice in our politics or one particular way, instead of holding the nuance of the different faiths that we have and the different values they give us.
Well, let me ask you one last question, and I'm going to ask you to answer on one foot, as we say in our tradition. So, in a nutshell, how would you recommend for your congregants and for people of faith? How do people of faith express their devotion both to a religious tradition and also to country, especially in these days when political faith and patriotism, there's sort of this kind of swirling conversation where a lot of things are intersecting. So in a nutshell, how would you recommend? Reverend DeTar, let's start with you this time.
I was hoping you were
we could go the other way. I was just trying to keep it even, but
no, I guess I'll say this in a nutshell. Your voice, your values, your faith matters, and it matters on the political stage, right? Don't let various candidates or forces or societal voices tell you that your faith isn't important when it comes to the conversation around politics. And I especially think about this because faith in politics has been the legacy of this country. It will continue to be. And if you don't raise your voice, someone else will speak on your behalf about what your faith means on the political stage. So use your voice. Your voice matters.
Thank you. Rabbi Howald?
I'm just going to use an example. So I went up to Albany. My whole family went up to lobby one of our local politicians on the vote on marriage equality in New York State. And I went up there, and some people said, you shouldn't be up there. It's not appropriate for, a rabbi to weigh in on this issue. Of course, when I got there were many Orthodox rabbis who were weighing in on this issue, in opposition. And there were many rabbis who were also weighing in support. So, neither side apparently believed that it was inappropriate for rabbis to weigh in on this issue. And, in terms of love of country, I took great pride in being able, I got to go right up and speak to, ultimately he didn't vote the way that I wanted him to, but I did have an opportunity to be heard. There was, free and open debate, and, the initiative was passed. And I just felt that was democracy in action. People went up there and expressed their viewpoint. I took great pride, not just in the fact that I went up there, not just in my faith, but in our country where, that could happen. It felt what it felt like to be, part of something bigger than yourself.
Thank you both so very much for answering some tough questions and also for being so candid and so personal in your responses. It's been my pleasure to be here with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Cantor Van, and thank you, Reverend DeTar Birt.
Thank you, Rabbi Michael. Thank you, Cantor Lauren. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.